Renee, should Shane Martin now be let in?
I don't think he will be let in. I think the federal government will find a way to stop him from coming back. It looks like a joke. I mean, it now makes the judgment look even more ridiculous, and it gives the government more impetus now to go after stopping this issue. I mean, half of New Zealand now will be coming to Australia. You know, there's another reason there'll be another catch cry, stop the bros, because they'll be coming back, the ones that have all been kicked out.
But Bruce, shouldn't the High Court, to be consistent, say Aboriginal activists like Callum Clayton Dixon, who travel on the passports issued by the Aboriginal Provisional Government, or their one, well, shouldn't they be allowed to come in on those passports?
Well, you get into a tricky constitutional area there, Andrew. Look, but I will say this, though, you know, constitutions and constitutional interpretations throw up some very odd interpretations from time to time. You only have to look at the American Constitution, you know, the right to bear arms, and now they're all walking around with submachine guns. I don't think that was quite what the Founding Fathers had in mind. And sometimes you just have to take the absurd with, you know, some very important principles enshrined in constitutions, and this is probably an example of one where, in my view, Australian Aborigines, obviously are Australian and shouldn't have to go much beyond demonstrating that. But when you get people like this character, then you should take, you should pause and ask yourself, well, you know, maybe we better have a look at his pedigree.
I think Renee was absolutely correct. It makes the decision look absolutely stupid. Renee, global warming is causing splits in the three biggest political parties, the Nationals, the Liberals, and now Labor. Today, two Labor MPs, frontbencher Matt Keogh and Patrick Gorman, said Labor should not seem anti-coal. Where is this split going?
Well, I guess the issue when it is a legacy from 6 years of fence sitting by Bill Shorten, and I think in part by doing that fence sitting, it brought a bit of peace, it brought stability. But now that they have to get off the fence, it makes for some very tough decisions, especially about, you know, when you've got a leader whose electorate is Grayndler, that could not be any different to the electorate of Capricornia. So I think until they actually form a climate policy, it's going to be very difficult for them to come up with language on coal, coal-fired generation and opening up the Galilee Basin.
Bruce?
Look, I think this is obviously a tough area for the Labor Party. We've discussed this before. But Labor does have to recognise, as does the government, that, you know, the reliance on fossil fuels internationally is starting to change. You only have to look at Boris Johnson's zero net fossil fuel dependency by 2050 to realise that this is something, emissions, which is something which is happening internationally. So we are going to have to accept that the world is going to become less reliant on coal than it is at the moment, and so we have to adapt policies to that reality. It means we have to create jobs in other areas. We do have to look to renewables, and but that doesn't mean to say you have to be totally anti-coal, because I think it's up to the countries who are importing coal to make those decisions about whether they want to continue using it in the quantity that they are now, or whether they want to start a serious transition to renewables. And Labor can't preempt that. I just think they have to recognise that there is going to be less reliance on coal than there is right now, and it will continue to diminish as the years go on.
Well, that depends
just
whether the government mandates that. Renee, yes, go ahead.
Yeah, just a couple of points. Today, Rio announced they're building a coal-fired generator in Mongolia. So much for the argument that, you know, that countries aren't building coal-fired generators. The second point is with the UK, they're not a resource-dependent economy like we are. So that's you know, it's almost a false narrative to talk about it that way. And the third point is we talk about a just transition, but unless they're like-for-like jobs, unless it gives you the ability to pay your mortgage that you have now with the same wage you've got now, it doesn't mean for very much. And I think if, you know, this is almost turning into the new boat issue for Labor if it can't find a way through.
Well, it has to develop. It has to develop policies.
What Renee said. Can I just say, I add a point to what Renee said. Rio Tinto will build a coal-fired generator in Mongolia, but not one in Australia, Bruce.
And that's because Australia doesn't want one, nor do the companies which make...
I want one.
Well, it's certainly not something which
The
companies like
smelters want one in
AGL
central
want.
Queensland.
It's certainly not something that these companies are prepared to do, because remember when Turnbull tried to get AGL to keep open a coal-powered generator in New South Wales, they said no. Why? Because the investors in their company weren't prepared to accept it. No, we have to accept that the world's changing, Andrew.
That's because of the legislation that makes any rejigging of the power station like that uneconomic, because they know governments are going to come in and wipe them out. Plus, of course, they're making a mozza on the power shortages in the meantime.
Well, it's also about renewables. It's about moving to renewables, Andrew, and accepting that reality.
Before we go, I want to tell a story, and I wonder what Renee thinks of this. The comedian Lawrence Mooney, Renee, has told Triple M something that I know for a fact is true in most details. Former Liberal Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull, the multi-millionaire, invited Bill Shorten, the Labor leader, over to Turnbull's mansion for a consolation dinner after he also lost his leadership. Now, Shorten thought, better not look cheap, bought a couple of quite reasonable wines for the dinner from Victoria, these wines, 2 bottles, around $70, between $70 and $100. Now, Turnbull took them from Shorten, put them to the side, and then served Shorten his own wine, which Shorten thought, wow, you know, must be good. Look at this mansion here. Goes home, checks on the internet. Turnbull's wines were actually under $20 a bottle. What's the moral here?
Do you remember when Turnbull gave one of his most impassioned speeches against Bill Shorten about how, you know, Bill Shorten loved a knees up? You know, I don't think this was the knees up he was quite expecting. You know, all I can imagine too is
knees under all the tables of millionaires.
That's
yes,
right.
I remember that.
And I'm just thinking, and I just don't know whether Lucy brought out some black and gold brie to go with the cheap bottle of wine. But the moral of the story is Turnbull clearly didn't think much of him by bringing out a bottle of, I don't know, a clean skin or whatever it was.
Well, Bruce?
Well, look, the only thing I can take out of this is that Turnbull certainly got quite a few cheap breads under the bed.
I was surprised. Cheap breads under the beds. That's very good. That's very good. But I'm surprised that somewhere in that mansion he could find a bottle of wine under $20. I wonder how long it took him to fuss to get out.
I tell you what, I reckon Bill brought him around the last time they had dinner, and Lucy said to him, "Foist that back on him when he comes next time. We don't have to put up with that sort of stuff,
Whoa,
Malcolm."
mean.